Story 1. My career is in maritime trade. Manufacturing is unlikely to return to the United States. Even with 50% tariffs, most goods remain cheaper to produce using low-cost labor and ship. For businesses, this simply means shifting marketing efforts toward other countries to compensate for the decline in American purchases of finished goods. 4 years is not enough time to build a factory. Companies will likely wait for the next administration. There are no tax incentives that make relocating manufacturing to the United States an advantageous business decision. Many freight forwarders are likely to go out of business as companies prefer to save money by working directly with carriers. In summary, the cost for international companies to enter the United States market remains too high, even with tariffs, so they are unlikely to return. Story 2. Think depression, not recession. Americans lost their minds when we were inconvenienced with masks during COVID-19. This country cannot handle an economic depression. Plan accordingly. Story 3. Years? Try decades. We've completely alienated our longtime allies and trading partners. We have proven that the United States government is fundamentally broken. It should not be possible for the largest economy in the world to radically change based on executive orders from one person. Every government and major corporation worldwide is trying to figure out how to exclude us from global trade, in the same way we do not trade with North Korea or other corrupt countries. I do not think most people are capable of understanding how severe this situation is going to become. Story 4. It is not the tariffs as much as the scorched earth diplomacy that has harmed us. He will back off the tariffs in a few weeks or months, but he has given the rest of the world the reason they were looking for to dismiss us. I do not think most Americans understand just how damaged our relationship with the rest of the Western world is right now, and even if another president like Obama is elected in 2028, it will not matter. The rest of the world understands that another disaster like Trump is only 4 years away, so there is no point in negotiating in good faith. Story 5. The damage he has done in the last 11 weeks will take 20 years to undo, assuming we get started on it immediately. If Congress continues to endorse every harmful action he takes over the next 2 years, even with a significant shift in power in 2026, the damage inflicted by him and the Republicans will take more than 20 years to repair. What is most concerning is that, as far as I can tell, there is almost no Republican in Washington who cares at all. Even when they discuss it, they never say, "This will be bad for the American people." Instead, they say, "We're going to be penalized in the midterms." They do not care who suffers or for how long. All they care about is their own political fortunes. Story 6. When a person who bankrupts 6 companies, including 3 casinos, retains the power to upset the world's balance of trade without first consulting experts in global economics, something is wrong. Something is very wrong. Story 7. These tariffs will not last for years. Trump is likely to be alarmed by falling markets and announce that he has secured trillions in new investments in the United States. With everyone respecting the US now, he will delay the tariffs and continue to postpone them. I genuinely believe this will happen next week. There is no way the tariffs will last even a month. Story 8. Living standards for the majority of Americans are expected to decline significantly. The reputational damage caused by Trump will take a generation to repair, if that is even possible. Story 9. 95% of the world does not live in America. Other countries are likely to bypass America and establish their own free trade zones. Story 10. Limit it unless Congress gathers a 2/3 majority to override a veto and establish tariff policy themselves. Story 11. Markets are crashing due to an economic sell-off. This has resulted in higher inflation, job losses, delayed retirement, and increased suicide rates. Story 12. It will not compel American industry to return. Not only did he impose tariffs on products made in other countries, he also placed tariffs on the raw materials. How can we produce our own products without the raw materials that do not exist here? None of these tariffs are intended to improve our economy. He is punishing us for not supporting him. It is retaliation for every charge against him. He does not care if his supporters are affected by it either. They are casualties of his personal war against the world. Story 13. Many older Americans are not going to retire. Many people will be laid off, and this may take a long time to recover from. Story 14. Countries are beginning to exclude America from their supply chains. Being viewed as an unreliable trading partner is detrimental to this country in both the short and long term. Story 15. The tariffs will be short-lived. While they last, they will significantly slow down the economy, and prices will rise. People are already struggling, so this will only worsen the situation. Story 16. Honestly, we are going to be in a difficult situation. The best-case scenario is that it is so unpopular and ineffective that we can return to a better path. In the worst case, the United States stops being the reserve currency, and we are excluded from almost everything. Essentially, we are giving up our dominance, which isn't the worst thing, but the only reason we have our position is that we were stable for so long after World War II. We are essentially throwing up our hands and opting out of the world, and that trend does not tend to end well for us or others. But this is what some people want: widespread poverty, the failure of the nation, and so on. Story 17. The United Kingdom's withdrawal from the European Union was the worst self-inflicted disaster in modern policy. Now, Donald Trump's America has taken the crown. Story 18. Well, hopefully it won't last too long. The most likely response is that once it becomes clear the president made a mistake, he will try to pretend he scored a big deal and cancel them. However, the uncertainty caused by the realization that the President of the United States can do this and is foolish enough to do this will continue to ripple through. The best scenario is for Congress to retract their constitutionally authorized sole authority to set tariffs. That will require a two-thirds majority, so a lot of Republicans will need to show some strength, but as this policy becomes increasingly unpopular, they may very well do that. Story 19. Post-Brexit austerity measures. At least when Truss made a significant mistake in front of the world, she had the decency to leave. Story 20. Honestly, I have no clue. I will say, though, I have spent the last few years bringing my cost of living to just over $1,200 per month because I am not trying to be taken advantage of by life. It would be a smart idea for everyone to focus on lowering their expenses. Every single salesperson, insurance representative, and utility provider will be doing everything they can to maximize their earnings so they can put food on the table. Save your money, everyone. Story 21. The wealthy are executing one of the largest manipulative schemes in history. They sold at high prices and will buy at low prices, indifferent to the harm it causes to the United States. Story 22. We have experienced this 2 additional times in the past 200 years. They had to wait 100 years between each occurrence to ensure that most people alive during that period were no longer living. Story 23. Economic depression. Even more than the tariffs themselves, the damage we are doing to our relationships with allies will be so painful and so lasting. Story 24. Anyone who hasn't figured it out already, here's the real reason behind the situation. Part of the declaration of the tariffs was Trump also declaring that this is a national emergency. This essentially gives him the power to declare martial law and take over everything pretty much anytime he wants. So the market tumbles, prices spike, and eventually people are going to get less than restful. Then he takes the steps to become king. We'll find out then how many members of the armed forces and police are willing to become his enforcers. Story 25. If he really sticks to his plans, it could be catastrophic. Nearly a year of record market highs has been undone, and it can only get worse. The only hope is that he abandons the idea. Of course, he will pretend it was his goal all along and that his objectives were accomplished, but I don't care. I'm not American, but his actions are threatening the global economy, not just that of the United States. Story 26. Negatively, similar to previous instances, compounded by the erratic and unrealistic behavior and stated expectations of Donnie, I believe the world will be more hesitant to make deals with the United States in general for a long time. This is evident as they have a clear example of how little a deal means when unwise individuals in the country elect a fraud to office. Story 27. I don't need my crystal ball to tell me it is going to be hard financially for most Americans in the near future, and that the road to recovery will be long and difficult. However, prosperity at the end of the road is never guaranteed. Story 28. This intentional weakening of the United States economy is not a strategy to strengthen the economy in the long run. It is essentially a playbook given to Trump by Russia. This approach isolates the United States on a geopolitical and global economic level, decreases the effectiveness of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and stifles any allied support in intelligence and military aid. Consequently, this benefits Russia by further expanding its buffer zone with NATO countries, allowing the lifting of economic restrictions imposed on it, and potentially increasing Russia's influence on the global stage. Story 29. Our former friends, allies, and trading partners have lost all faith in the United States. They can no longer trust us to behave rationally on any matter. This situation is largely due to Donald Trump's actions. He is causing chaos and making it difficult for others to approach us. Story 30. States that are large enough will invoke states' rights and negotiate independent agreements with other countries, specifically Canada and Mexico. Story 31. The situation is much worse than the average American realizes. However, everyone puts their hopes in peaceful protests. People are about to discover how effective peaceful protests can be when the social contract has been destroyed. Story 32. He is actively trying to destroy the economy in its entirety. If he is allowed to continue without restraint, that is what will happen. Story 33. Retaliatory tariffs on the United States may prompt a response from Trump, leading to further increases in tariffs. Multiple countries will likely increase trade with one another and minimize interactions with the United States, resulting in a significant contraction of foreign trade. This situation may lead to layoffs, a spike in inflation, rising poverty rates, and an official declaration of recession. Most countries and companies will likely choose the path of least resistance. They will replicate the approach taken by Foxconn during Trump's first term, making empty promises to encourage him to ease restrictions, but failing to follow through. Prices will be increased while they wait out the administration. Trump has incentivized the global community to impose economic hardship on Americans. United States Nintendo fans are already frustrated with Trump due to the tariff delays affecting Switch 2 pre-orders. And this frustration is likely to grow as more serious economic issues arise. It will not be limited to video game fans. An increasing number of Americans will begin calling for Trump's removal from office, along with the removal of his entire administration. This is what many people around the world desire, and Trump has inadvertently empowered them to pursue this outcome by raising prices and allowing market forces to take their course. Meanwhile, Trump and his administration will continue to reassure everyone, saying, "Hang tight, it's going to work. You'll see, it just needs more time. Let him do his thing." Ultimately, it will be up to the American people to determine how long this situation continues before Trump leaves the White House. The sooner he and his administration are removed from power, the easier it will be to address the ensuing chaos. Story 34. I expect a major recession, significant unemployment, companies going out of business, and a lengthy recovery, assuming it ever occurs. Story 35. I feel excited every time I see a tweet from someone expressing their frustration about being treated unfairly, which is a positive feeling. Story 36. I believe it will harm small and mid-sized businesses. Large corporations like Amazon and Walmart will be able to absorb the additional costs and pass the burden on to customers. Some corporations are large enough that it might be feasible to bring manufacturing to this country, but that would require billions of dollars in several years. Small businesses will not be able to withstand that. As a result, there will be another mass consolidation of wealth and power. This is the fourth such occurrence in my lifetime, and it is the first that was intentionally caused for that purpose. Story 37. Inflation and another Trump recession. If only the overwhelming majority of economists had warned us. Story 38. Working in a factory is a challenging job. It is difficult to hire people for such positions in America, as few apply. This situation seems unfair and primarily benefits the wealthy. Story 39. We are all going to be wealthy. Many people, including some of the best, are saying we will be richer than we can imagine. I am trying to decide whether to purchase everything I need or want before prices increase. or to save my money in case I need it for warmth this winter. Story 40. It will impact our grandchildren significantly, and they will be dealing with the repercussions. Our former trading partners are currently developing entirely new trade agreements and routes that essentially ignore the United States as a market. Why wouldn't they? We have shown that trade agreements we negotiated are not worth the paper they are printed on. Our president is a capricious leader, and we have demonstrated that the average American voter cannot be trusted to avoid aligning with detrimental leadership due to biases against marginalized groups. The United States information technology infrastructure, worth hundreds of billions, is set to be dismantled and replaced with homegrown efforts. This includes everything from software to hardware to satellites. Manufacturing will suffer greatly due to increased material costs and decreasing exports. People are already removing our products from their shelves, and perishable goods are going unsold as people protest by refusing to buy them even at a loss. Given the administration's tendency to double down on poor decisions, this situation is unlikely to change. The economic situation will worsen as Americans struggle to afford even basic goods. Furthermore, the brain drain will exacerbate the problems as anyone with the means to leave the country will do so, negatively affecting sectors like pharmaceutical development, semiconductor fabrication, and chemical engineering. Food insecurity is poised to become a major issue in the future. Electronics, including computers, smartphones, and televisions, will become unaffordable luxuries. The same applies to car parts and new vehicles. Additionally, layoffs could reach millions. We are facing a dire situation as we transition from having an economy and standard of living that were once the envy of the world to a decaying system marked by extreme poverty. My only consolation is that the majority of individuals supportive of current policies live paycheck to paycheck, and major food banks have recently had their funding cut to the point of potential collapse. This presents a grim reality where many may suffer significantly in the near future. Story 41. The stock market will likely bounce back because it always does, but nothing is going to get cheaper for regular people. Prices only ever go up. Companies are greedy, and even if they stop paying the tariff, they are not going to lower prices afterward. They will just have higher profits. Story 42. The United States will never be able to manufacture certain products cheaper than places like China, unless employment laws are disregarded. Prices will increase. The middle class will disappear, leaving only the rich and the poor. Story 43. If these levels remain in place for a significant period, millions of workers will be displaced and stagflation will take hold, likely ushering in a new depression. And all for nothing. Cheap labor is not the only reason why manufacturing was offshored in the first place. For argument's sake, let's say it was to incentivize companies to reshore manufacturing jobs across all sectors. Significantly high tariffs would need to be in place for years to demonstrate trade policy stability. Only after companies realize that a stable protectionist trade policy is here to stay would they consider making the necessary investments. That process would likely take more than 5 years before anyone even breaks ground on new production facilities in the United States. The previous administration is not capable of instituting that kind of stability in any policy area. Even if it were possible, the preceding years of economic suffering could be existential. So, having said all that, we are in a difficult situation for no good reason. Story 44. If you have debt, start rearranging your finances to pay it off as soon as possible, or as much as you can. If you don't have savings, open a savings account and begin depositing money into it. Now is the time to strengthen your financial position for when challenges arise. Story 45. I believe they are going to achieve their goal, which is the destruction of the United States of America. Not just the tariffs, but tariffs are a significant part of it. They aim to make it prohibitively expensive to live, cause a depression, roll back constitutional rights, and undermine checks and balances. The list continues. Story 46. I believe the United States will never be viewed the same way again. The realization, both among us as Americans and in the rest of the world, that a few wealthy minority players can unite, disregard the rule of law, and impose their own selfish and reckless agenda, disrupting the entire global economy, sends a clear message that the United States should no longer hold such power. I think the golden days of being an American are over. The world will find ways to connect, stay safe, trade, prosper, and cooperate without relying on or even including the United States. Story 47. Buckle up for this ride. The United States represents 15% of China's exports. The Belt and Road Initiative started as a paper in 2013 and was launched shortly afterward. At this stage, China has invested across Asia and Africa to build infrastructure as a method to increase exports globally. As of 2023, the Belt and Road Initiative represents 40% of the world's trade by dollar value and 50% of the world's trade by container traffic. And that's just what leaves China going west. In 2023, the infrastructure investments by China represented $7.5 trillion in increased gross domestic product across the region. To put it into perspective, this is equivalent to the United States' annual federal budget. China is also the primary trading partner of 55% of the global economy. Another point to consider is that the United States dollar is the reserve currency for 58% of the world, while the Chinese renminbi is the reserve currency for approximately 2.5%. The renminbi didn't even start out as a reserve currency until 2016, when the United States dollar was at 65%. China itself is already sitting on $3 trillion in currency reserves, the highest globally, compared to the United States, which has 12 times less, and 3 times less than the next highest country, Japan, which has $1 trillion. So, the United States decides to enact tariffs, and here's what China can do. First, China can direct more of their exports west to make up for the loss of trade with the United States. Even if trade to the United States falls by half, that's only a 7.5% dip for them, no net loss. Next, China can lean on their trading partners to use the renminbi as their reserve currency. Russia is already trying to switch to the renminbi, with $650 billion in reserves. At that point, they'll strengthen the renminbi, allowing them to start dumping their other reserves, like the dollar. They could profit significantly from currency exchange arbitrage. They'll likely leave the United States dollar to dump last, enabling them to fire sale the dollar assets and further tank the value of the dollar after the Russian dumping. This devalues the United States dollar and mitigates some of the economic sanctions imposed on Russia. Assuming the conflict continues that long or that changes in U.S. policy do not reverse the sanctions. They can use some of the billions they've made to increase direct investments into the United States, especially as the country fights inflation and commercial banks become hesitant to lend while the Federal Reserve raises interest rates. This situation mirrors what occurred in 2021 and 2022 when the Federal Reserve increased rates to combat inflation from COVID. Now, China is extracting profit from U.S. manufacturing without concern for tariffs. They are making more money by having the renminbi used as a reserve currency globally than what they lost in trade with the United States. The United States might resemble a failed wrestler who overindulged and now sits on the curb in Los Angeles, panhandling for money. Many people hoping that America will be great again will witness what it's like when Europe levels the playing field and can dictate terms. This may be part of a broader plan to curb immigration, as even individuals in Honduras will think twice about attempting to come to the United States, potentially seeking advice from retired Cubans on building makeshift rafts to float to China. Since then, tariffs have wiped out roughly $11 trillion in value. To put that into perspective, let's say a third of what was lost came from retail investors or everyday people. The total consumer debt on credit cards in the United States is around $1.2 trillion, and total auto loan debt is around $1.6 trillion. Essentially, what was lost in value from retail investment in the stock market could have paid off every American citizen's credit card debt and auto loans. What was lost in the stock market since Inauguration Day could have settled all non-housing debt in the United States. The Federal Reserve held rates steady in the last announcement, and Jerome Powell has already discussed how tariffs are causing inflationary pressure after the back and forth with China, Mexico, and Canada. Companies have already moved pricing higher based on the initial rounds of tariffs and the United States Postal Service canceling the exemption for packages valued under $800. The BRICS nations discussed moving away from using the dollar last year, but these recent rounds of tariffs have furthered that conversation. Unless they unite to create a new reserve currency, the only nation with a chance of using their currency is China. BRICS nations now exceed the gross domestic product of the United States, and based on purchasing power parity, China has surpassed the United States. These tariffs are likely to increase the advantage China holds. The tariffs on China currently stand at 74%, and a study conducted last year indicated that tariffs at 60% could result in only a 1% decrease in China's gross domestic product. The Atlanta Federal Reserve has already predicted a 2.8% drop for the United States this quarter. Meanwhile, China, Japan, and South Korea have united to respond to tariffs, something people might have previously thought impossible. If tariffs are raised on Ukraine and Russia, there may be an opportunity to bring them to the negotiating table as well. These alliances among different countries should be seen as troubling for the U.S. economy. A perfect example is the ASEAN alliance. Individually, these countries may not contribute much in terms of gross domestic product, but together they have created the fifth largest economy in the world. All of these alliances are currently emerging. It's no longer just a matter of the United States versus another country. It is evolving into the United States versus the world, and it appears this is pushing in the opposite direction of what voters thought they wanted. Story 48. I'm starting to wonder how these manufacturing factories are going to work. If the price of steel increases and they need factories to operate, while machine parts are sourced globally, I don't understand how the calculations add up. Story 49. When asked what the top priority during the election is, people repeatedly mention the economy. However, what does the average Trump supporter understand about economics? The stage is set for a 4 to 8 year recession, similar to 2008. People blamed President Biden for inflation, which was largely due to pandemic-related supply chain issues. Many were upset that eggs cost $7 a dozen. I witnessed $13,000 disappear from my retirement savings in 24 hours, which is a significant amount. This situation illustrates how the upper class convinces the lower class to help undermine the middle class. Story 50. Assuming these conditions persist until 2028 and we elect a far-left Democrat as president, along with a similar Congress and Senate, the damage will have already been done. Countries and companies that contributed to America's greatness will have shifted to new suppliers and will be producing for other nations. The global community will collaborate more effectively, some out of resentment for America's actions. Ultimately, the result may be that America becomes isolated in trade. We will appear too unstable, our economy will collapse, and those in power will eliminate Social Security, Medicare, and Veterans Affairs. Many individuals will find themselves without money, and with a high number of firearms present, crime rates will rise. I do not believe the economy will be any better than when Donald Trump was in office. He has already caused significant permanent damage, and the situation will likely deteriorate further. We could regress from Iran in 1960 to Iran in 1985 rapidly as religious influence grows and those without power become disenfranchised. The military could intervene by removing those in power who disregard the Constitution, potentially reversing many of Trump's policies and arresting key figures on the far right. However, such a scenario seems unlikely. Inflation is likely to surge, reminiscent of the Weimar Republic. I apologize for my pessimism, but the situation seems dire. Story 51. I'm really tired of these engagement farming posts. Do you think anyone will come in here and say, I have never been more excited? Story 52. The tariffs are inconsequential compared to the loss of trust and goodwill in the United States. If and when the tariffs are removed, consumers who are deliberately avoiding Made in America products will continue to do so. This could potentially increase the trade deficits with those countries. Story 53. It will be great. Jobs such as making sneakers and t-shirts in unsafe sweatshops for $2 a day or working in factories for 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, to produce plastic toys that were outsourced decades ago will return. Local cultivation of coffee, bananas, and other products that thrive in tropical regions will need to be replaced with items grown in the United States when they are in season. Not to mention all the jobs relocated overseas due to unsafe working conditions. Everything will come back home. No one in the office desired a sedentary job, especially when they could earn only a fraction of their current wages by doing hard manual labor under hazardous conditions for twice the time. Story 54. Of course they are going to cause things to go bad quickly. Literally everything he touches goes wrong. Who can bankrupt casinos? Story 55. If you liked Hoovervilles, you are going to absolutely love Trump Towns. Some say it will be the best dystopian nightmare. Story 56. It is impossible to determine the actual tariff policy. Is the goal to maintain permanent tariffs to encourage domestic manufacturing in the United States? Or is it to use tariffs as leverage to renegotiate trade agreements? Cannot be both. No one will invest in billion-dollar manufacturing facilities based on inconsistent statements. Story 57. It might shift enough voters to support the Democratic Party, leading to steady growth for the 8 years following the Trump administration. Story 58. We have damaged our goodwill with our trading partners. We are in a difficult situation, but conservative politicians will cope by blaming Democrats. Story 59. Why are you asking Reddit? Are the 10,000 articles written by economists and specialists foretelling doom not enough? Story 60. We are in a difficult situation with a severe recession and at best stagflation. There has been a significant rise in the debt-to-GDP ratio. If a conflict arises between the United States and China, it may only serve to distract from our existing problems. I believe that when the European Union responds, it could lead to a further collapse of the stock market. On April 30th, we will receive the first quarter gross domestic product report, which is expected to be disappointing. This may lead to another market downturn. Those who supported or did not support the previous administration should take responsibility for the current state of affairs. Story 61. America, as the global power and world order that we have enjoyed for nearly 100 years, is no longer relevant. There will be no return to how America is viewed and treated around the world. We may have compromised the dollar as the primary global currency and could face a recession or possibly a depression, depending on how much the situation escalates. Regardless, the initial statement is already a truth in my opinion. Story 62. My monthly prescription has increased by 900% from last month. Someone has more work to do. I am sure some senior citizens will be willing to step up once their supplemental security income is gone. Story 63. As a 41-year-old American from Wisconsin with 2 jobs to pay bills, rent, and save a little, the rest of my life feels difficult. I work 70 hours a week just to avoid living paycheck to paycheck. My full-time job is as a warehouse technician in commercial furniture installation, and my part-time job is as a forklift operator in a freight terminal. Both jobs are frontline positions in this trade war. Hope for the future seems to be fading. Story 64. I work for a large technology company specializing in logistics. I conducted simulations on our impact, and the results are concerning. We tend to do a lot in the United States because we have a make-it-happen mentality compared to Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. They are already eager to address this issue. I predict millions of dollars will move directly to Europe in the coming months. They are slower than we are and have considerably more regulatory hurdles, but if Norway or Germany effectively presents their case to management, things could move quickly. I hope I can keep my job. My opinion is that the former president will reverse these changes as he has done in the past, but it might be too late for that. Companies prefer a combination of affordability, speed, and quality, but they also value stability, and we have completely lost that. Story 65. It is already happening. Not years, but months. This is not just about higher prices. Businesses will fully shut down and people will lose jobs. Smaller businesses will be hit hardest by this. Story 66. They will not last for years. If the economy remains poor in 3 years, the Republican Party will lose their influence, assuming they do not resort to unfair tactics, which they may attempt. All this negativity will be discarded and we will begin to repair relationships around the world. In the meantime, people will be angry. It will not be a pleasant situation. Story 67. The funniest thing to me is that a tariff is a tax on Americans. Americans pay all tariff taxes. Trump says, I'm taxing China, I'm taxing Canada. But even his followers understand what a tariff is, and they know they are the ones paying it. If Biden had imposed these exact tariffs a year ago, every supporter would have been furious. Story 68. Oh, we are in a difficult situation. We have demonstrated that regardless of how reasonable our policy and government are, they can be disregarded in less than 100 days. Our country was once powerful, but the real strength lay in the trust that the world placed in us. We were stable. We had impartial courts to resolve conflicts. We had individuals making economic policy who understood economics, even if they did so poorly. All of that is gone. Story 69. Trump is going to treat the tariffs like a bidding war, pitting each country against the next. This approach may backfire if countries realign. Story 70. The tariffs can be removed by the next president if there is one. The destroyed reputation and the loss of trust that Mr. Trump has brought upon our country will take generations to restore. Story 71. With Trump, there will be no U.S. economy in the coming years. California and New York will go at it alone. Story 72. They said years. We are heading into a Great Depression before the end of the year. There is no doubt about it. Trump will not remove the tariffs, and even if he did, people would not just start trading with us again after that. The damage is done. Story 73. Let's see, it has been done twice before on this scale, and both times triggered massive economic depressions. Therefore, I predict a depression with high unemployment. Because so few people in today's economy can actually grow their own food, we may end up facing violence from hungry individuals who simply want food. In summary, this depression will lead to high unemployment, numerous financial foreclosures, and many people losing their homes, while wealthy individuals buy them up at discounted prices. Story 74. It will hurt us, but we deserve it to encourage us to take action against this new regime. Hopefully, it will serve as a wake-up call for those who supported the former administration. My hopes aren't high, but they are not lost. Story 75. I understand that this may be a concern primarily for Americans, but as a European, I can say that we are aware of the challenges you face as long as Trump is in charge. It is interesting to note that lately, the news from America mainly focuses on additional tariffs affecting us and, from time to time, the financial struggles of some wealthy individuals. Story 76. I don't understand how Trump thinks tariffs will lead to more manufacturing in the United States. Even if companies decide to open factories in the United States, these won't be built overnight, with estimates of a minimum of 2 years. Additionally, it assumes that every part of the manufacturing process will be made in the United States, which is unlikely. Even if a company decides to manufacture in the United States, they will still need to import some components that will be subject to tariffs. Furthermore, labor rates in the United States are high, so the prices of finished goods will be higher than those of pre-tariff imported goods, resulting in increased costs for the consumer. This will lead to a higher cost of living and a lower quality of life for Americans. Yet Trump claims this will be great for America. How can a high cost of living and lower quality of life be considered good? I feel like I'm missing some understanding of how this is supposed to work. Story 77. According to some people, he is attempting to change the entire economic market. However, he will fail. His plan is to impose higher tariffs, causing all countries to eventually collapse and accept new, better tariffs because, as he says, we can live without them, but they can't live without us. He believes that the European Union, for instance, will impose significant tariffs on the United States that will adversely affect EU citizens. Here lies his first mistake. The European Union is intelligent and only imposes substantial tariffs on goods that EU citizens can source elsewhere. His second mistake is that the EU does not need much from the United States. We are referring to products like Microsoft and Netflix. These are things we can live without. Furthermore, the European Union is imposing high tariffs on goods from the United States, but only on products from states with governors who support Trump. This means the state we source legumes from, which sells 86% of its goods to Europe, will face significant losses as consumers in Europe will turn to South America for legumes. As a result, the state selling legumes will lose 86% of its sales, and the governor will have to explain to his constituents that this happened because of Trump, which will make Trump unpopular in states that support him. Next, Trump's plan fails to acknowledge that the European Union requires the United States for protection. However, the EU is actively engaging in a full-scale rearmament. They are using their financial resources on weapons and beginning to develop their own planes, among other things. They have stated, America can no longer be trusted ever again and is no longer the big brother, so we will have to fend for ourselves. We might even risk the US becoming our enemy. Thus, Trump's strategy to coerce them into compliance will ultimately fail, as he can no longer rely on the "we will protect you" aspect of his plan. No country in the European Union will ever trust the United States again. The US is too unstable to be considered reliable in business or politics. Therefore, his grand scheme will fail, leaving the US isolated with no trading partners. This situation is not solely about tariffs. It is about trust. The European Union has lost all faith in the US as an ally. Even if a new president is elected, there is no certainty that a subsequent vote will not support another unsuitable leader. Consequently, the European Union will never trust the US again. Trump has indeed created a mess this time. Companies in Europe are hesitant to engage in business with the US because they cannot predict how tariffs will change from month to month or if the leadership will take actions that could jeopardize their businesses. Moreover, many individuals from the EU are reluctant to visit the US following reports of Canadian tourists having their visas revoked and being deported to South America. Trump has succeeded in one regard. He has made America stand alone in the international economy. How will this be corrected? As one observer commented, "This can only be resolved when everyone affected is dead and gone." The US will need to navigate its challenges independently for the next 70 years. Trump behaves as if the US accounts for 99% of global trade when, in reality, the US represents only about 10% of the market. The European Union and China can thrive without this 10%. If he is reckless enough to declare war in a futile attempt to salvage everything, this may be the first time the US faces devastating attacks from both the European Union and China, and this conflict would unfold within the US itself. Story 78. I believe there will be significant economic consequences. Countries will likely introduce retaliatory tariffs and may cut the United States off as a trading partner, making active efforts to remove the US from their supply chains due to perceived unreliability. They will form other economic alliances. Under pressure, Trump may threaten to cut off or terminate any existing security agreements, forcing nations to militarize. Ultimately, this could lead to a more militarized world. In the long run, the implications are concerning. Story 79. It is going to decline, and it will take a full 2 terms of the next president to reverse much of the damage that the former president has done. Story 80. Just like with the first term, he is so incredibly incompetent that he is showing the average American just how flimsy the entire fabric of our country is. It's all made up and pretend rules to keep the rich in charge. Ironically, he accelerated the movement for workers to rise up against the system both times. It's as if there is a way to cheat and stay wealthy in life that all the affluent use, but he is so greedy and foolish that he is exposing the cheating because he can't just cheat a little. He has to be the biggest cheater. He ruins the scam for everyone, just like he cheats at golf. Story 81. It will raise prices significantly. Additionally, once the tariffs are eliminated, prices will not return to their appropriate levels or decrease as quickly as they should. The middle class will only have money for necessities. Story 82. America has lost its standing and respect in the world. We may never recover from this situation because the next president might be a Republican and continue the same flawed policies. We risk becoming a third-world country under such leadership. Story 83. My hard-earned money will continue to lose value while those in power insist that inflation is beneficial, ultimately making me poorer. Story 84. I have been investing a few $100,000s a year in real estate, especially in remodeling and rehabilitation. All that spending has stopped because I have lost faith in this country. I am looking to shift my investments to other countries. Story 85. I'm deeply worried for all of us who work outside manufacturing because it seems increasingly likely the dollar will crash to a more realistic price. This implies massive inflation and stagflation along the way, along with a likely default on our debt given the American appetite for irresponsible tax cuts. Latin American countries have faced similar challenges, but due to American exceptionalism, it appears we have not learned those lessons. We are becoming a banana republic that cannot even grow many bananas. As a country, we have become deeply entitled and ignorant, and few are aware of how much of our purchasing power, not just through cheap labor, is subsidized by foreigners. We derive about 20% of our ability to buy things from the global financial system using the dollar as a reserve currency. There are nearly as many dollars in circulation outside the United States as there are within, and many trades settle in US dollars that have nothing to do with a US entity but are instead exchanges between two foreign parties, such as a Turkish factory buying equipment from Japan or an Indonesian refinery purchasing crude oil from Nigeria. The primary reason the US dollar enjoys this privilege is based on trust, faith, and credit that we are a country governed by the rule of law and that reliably pays back its debts. This trust ensures the currency holds its value over time and creates a virtuous circle of confidence and liquidity from others around the world who believe the same. This situation also results in a significant structural subsidy for U.S. financial institutions. The evidence of this is clear to anyone who has lived internationally. Multiple times in my career, I have observed that the same job in different countries, e.g., the Toronto, Sydney, or London office compared to New York, pays 20% to 50% less. This disparity is not due to Americans being inherently better at the same role, although factors like productivity, holiday leave, natural resources, and insurance or tax differences contribute to some of the differential. The main reason for the salary gap in leading service industries like technology or scientific research and development is the strong dollar, which serves as a structural subsidy for our banks and financial sector at the expense of farmers and manufacturers. Now that my government has lost its way and demonstrates daily a lack of respect for the rule of law or its commitments, not only to foreign counterparts but also to U.S. citizens, why wouldn't anyone outside the country seek ways to untether themselves from our irresponsible chaos? It may not happen overnight, but it will unfold gradually. Almost 20% of investment in our stock markets, factories, and other capital formation comes from foreign investors. Once trust is lost, it takes 10 times as long to rebuild, far beyond a single election cycle. After electing irresponsible leaders twice, why wouldn't you consider a slower but steadier approach by investing in businesses in other parts of the world? There is also no good reason for many of our trade partners not to target services as well as goods for tariffs, effectively retaliating where we arguably have unfair trade surpluses. The British pound was once the world's reserve currency during the colonial era. Most Americans today would have no idea what the British East India Company was, even though its history, along with that of the Dutch, effectively invented the modern corporation from which the United States gained, and is now squandering so much power. $10 eggs will feel like a bargain when everything at the grocery store rises to those prices, but our salaries cannot possibly match this. The answer to all this is not cryptocurrency or gold, as some may claim. It is more likely that the world will shift to settling trade in the euro, Japanese yen, and many other stable currencies instead, from Australian dollars to Swiss francs. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.